Hello, good evening, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this 52nd edition of Vision du Réel, and welcome to this second industry talk, which is called, as you can see, Film Festival Distribution Strategy 1 year later. We had the great pleasure to hold a discussion related to that a year ago when everything was just starting, and we thought it might be interesting and relevant for all of us to try and see what happened between the last 12 months, what were the effects on the industry, how festivals reacted, how people have been dealing with the reaction of the general reaction and the business it had, on which impact it had on the business, rather on the distribution and promotion side. We are very, very honored and happy to welcome such a prestigious panel of people. And I would like to welcome all of them, starting with Tabitha Jackson, who's the director, of course, of Sundance Film Festival. Thanks a lot, Tabitha, for being with us. Carlo Chatrian, who is the artistic director of the Berlinale and has a Vision du Réel poster behind him because he's here in Nyon. It's not a fake branding. We have Jason Ishikawa, who is senior executive at Cinetic Media in the USA, and Hedi Zardi, who is the CEO of Luxbox in Paris, which is a co-production and distribution company. Thanks a lot for being with us. I would like also to wholeheartedly thank Finn Halligan, who was already moderating this talk a year ago. So we're just kind of following up on the work we started last year. Again, it's really about, trying to understand, with, of course, the great example of Berlinale and Sundance, how the new shape of the landscape has affected the business and the distribution of films. So we are very happy about these guests being with us. I also would like to remind you that on Wednesday, there will be one more industry talk, this time rather with filmmakers and producers. So please make sure to check that one out. It's really about, trying to have different views on the situation and trying to explore potentially also what is going to happen in the next month. We really hope that things are going to get better. Here in Nyon, there are some people, so we are enjoying theaters, small scale festival, but still, with a glimpse of hope for the future. So I hope this glimpse of hope is just the beginning for all of us. I wish you all a very great talk, and I hope that we can all meet for real very soon. Thanks a lot for the participation, and Finn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you so much. As you said, exactly 1 year ago at Vision du Réel, we held one of these first webinars at one of the first online festivals to discuss the issue, but we never imagined we'd still be here today. There's been such a lot of change over the last year, and the interesting question is, how much of it is going to be permanent? Where next? Is it fundamental change? And here, of course, are four people with extensive experience in confronting the issues of coronavirus and film festivals and distribution, and trying to strategize for the future. A warm welcome to everyone. I'd like to start by asking you all about the most challenging aspects of the last year. I know it's been a huge year, but also about the toughest decisions that you had to make. I'd like to start with you, Tabitha, because you made a very early decision to make Sundance 2021 an online festival. It worked out to be a great success, but can you talk about coming to that decision, and also it was your first festival?
Yes, thanks, Finn, and it's so wonderful to be here with these great people for this conversation and here at Vision du Réel. So thank you so much. Yes, it was my first festival, and I just wanted to add some nuance to what you said. We, from early on, from about this time in the year, knew that we had to plan for certain scenarios. Either we could go ahead, everything would be fine, and we could go ahead fully in person, or that everything would be terrible and we'd have to go only online, or that there would be some wonderful intermediate hybrid space. We were pulling the levers up and down on those scenarios all the way through. So what we committed to early, Finn, to your point, was making sure that we had an online platform and a festival with on it, not simply a kind of on-demand platform, but a festival with on it that we could deploy on its own if necessary. But we planned right up to the last moment. Every feature film was going to have a drive-in in Los Angeles. We really did want to express in our home state of Utah. So those decisions, the decisions to pull those things, were A, the hardest things to do, and B, the very last things we did. So it was rough, but then it turned out that although we thought Los Angeles would be this great place for drive-ins and the weather was wonderful and people could be outside, it was like you could see the epicenter of the pandemic gradually just moved over LA right during the week of the festival. So it was, in a sense, an easy decision to pull those drive-ins because it was so obvious that safety had to be paramount, and that's what we dealt with. But yeah, that was the hardest thing, pulling the last remnants of in-person screenings. But we did have the satellite screens, a number of art house cinemas, 20 or 30 activating across the US. So it wasn't an entirely online festival, but that's what the core proposition was by the time we got to the end of it.
And just quickly to follow up on that, looking back on it, it was very well received, as I mentioned. How does that make you feel? What's your sort of verdict on your own festival in terms of the changes you had to incorporate and putting in the, being an online festival?
I think it can be summed up in one word, which is phew. That's basically the response. But the work begins, for all of us immediately. What is next year going to look like? And we're again in the position of needing to plan in the midst of uncertainty. And in a sense, it's more uncertain this time because it will be possible to have in-person expressions, but the world won't be back to normal, and work has now been stopped for almost a year. So, what are we going to see in terms of the films that have been made? So it's not going to be easy this year either.
Carlo, could I just ask you? I mean, Berlin, obviously, it's a huge audience-facing, city-based event. You went a different way. You didn't have your festival online, and you decided, the European film market, which runs parallel to the festival, split into being held with the festival to come later. Although you did have an online presence for journalists, media to see the films and review them. But can you talk about your decision? Because I know you were always hoping for another outcome for the Berlinale.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's not only my decision, and the Berlinale, I am in charge of the artistic side, and Mariette Rissenbeck is in charge of the organization. And also, it's important to mention that Berlinale is founded and supported by the government. So each decision has to be discussed with the government, the federal government of Germany. The outcome of the 2021 edition is the result of the discussion we had, me and Mariette, and with the government. So as you said, we started with one plan to have the festival happening in town with a reduced capacity, and then by the end of November, it was clear that that was not an option anymore. So on that, we had a number of alternative plan, and the plan we choose, as you said, is a plan quite very hybrid in the sense that we split what usually is Reunite at the festival. So we had an online part for professionals and press with an in-present part only for the jury. So we host the jury in Berlin in the end of February, beginning of March. And now we are still in the process. So the festival is not over. So it's hard for me to give you the final picture. So we are still working and hoping to have the second half, which is very dear to us. So to host screenings in theaters or in open air in town in Berlin in June. But this is still up in the air because of the decision of the government again, and the decision of the Berlin Senate also.
Given that you'd obviously wanted for something different, was there anything that surprised you that was successful or unexpectedly successful of your decision? I mean, or the reaction to it, or?
Well, I have learned that in every edition, you compose the program and you are like in a bubble. So you deal with filmmakers, with producers, with your colleagues, but then it's always the answer of the public and the professionals, it's part of the public that give you an answer. And this year, this feeling of living in a bubble was even bigger. If I have to be totally honest, the feedback I got were overwhelming. I mean, I was very pleased by the result. Still, I have the impression that I don't know where the reality is. I don't know how to say that differently, meaning that the feedback we got from press were and are very positive, but without the other half, without the real reaction of the audience, the clapping or whatever it is, I feel that something is missing. So I am very, I mean, I am happy because the films we selected were very well received, but at the same time, I cannot be fully satisfied until I won't have the second half.
Jason, if I could ask you to talk about Cinetic's relationship with festivals. Obviously, you had big decisions to make regarding your films. And, when and how did you start to strategize differently? And, how was that process for you guys?
Yeah, I think it was really sort of film by film, thinking about what the needs are and what we really got out of movies. I think that was really fundamentally, changed. And, the first 3 months into the pandemic, it was pretty much just damage control. We had 15 films that had lost their premieres, had already been announced at festivals. And it was thinking about what to do with those movies. Do they need a festival premiere? Do we wait? And for a handful of films, like films that had planned to play at Tribeca, for example, we did wait. So the films haven't screened anywhere and will, premiere in earnest this time in June. So that is a lot of patience on a filmmaker's part to have to deal with that. And also, in the midsummer, we were really strongly looking at what the fall festivals would look like, what our goals were for films in that window. A lot of our films had distribution that were ending up at the fall festivals, and we didn't take a lot of films for sales. So we really, and I think that was around the same time we were really starting in earnest to talk with the Sundance team about what the festival would look like. And that was a long conversation over the course of several months of thinking about, what had worked in virtual festivals, what we liked about certain components of it, what we think could be changed, especially as it relates to the industry, and seeing things like what Toronto did with their app and the accessibility and ease of industry to watch movies was a really positive sign. And we wanted to sort of figure out how we can sort of align our needs for buyers and distribution and press to sort of sync up with a film festival in a designated window. So a lot of that was sort of looking at what other people were doing and the innovations that were happening in the festival space in order to figure out what made sense for some of the movies that we were working on. And I think it was really telling that, this year was the first year we had a full nonfiction slate at Sundance. A lot of documentarians were able to, they work with small filmmaking crews. They had shot a lot of things that could be edited in the pandemic. So that to me sort of wasn't surprising in retrospect that we were able to bring a lot of films to the festival, but they were made during the pandemic in a certain kind of way that was possible at the time.
Do you think, Jason, just following up from that, the sort of wider exposure that Sundance was able to get some of these films this year within the United States, it wasn't just confined to Park City, do you think that helped your films?
I think the press, the accessibility for press to watch movies was pretty extraordinary in terms of the sheer volume of press that some of our films received that we felt was really necessary, especially as it related to a smaller festival with a shorter window where we were really concerned with word of mouth, being able over the course of a week or 2 weeks, it's a little easier than 5 days for buzz to spread. But I think press really helped that process along. And what we're seeing is a lot of American festivals are taking their lead from Sundance in terms of what they can and can't do, and we're thinking a lot about what is meaningful for us in the festival space. What do we get out of it, and what films make sense to present in that way, at least in the context of distribution, seeking distribution, and others that don't necessarily.
If I could ask you, the films that Luxbox represents are usually big screen artistic propositions which do need delicate handling and introduction to the marketplace. So to ask you as well, how did you start to strategize? And it's something that Jason just mentioned, to work with directors themselves about how their films are going to be seen.
Helps us a lot to reach our distributor. Plus, we team with Cinetic for the international press of some of these films, and I totally agree, the press really, for example, Anakat's film in Sundance, all the American press watch the film, and we have a range of positive reviews for the film that help us to work the film with the distributor. And Natural Light, the Hungarian first feature film by Dinesh Nagy that was in competition in Berlin, has an amazing reaction from the press, and we use this reaction, and we are very happy because the film is reaching several territories, several deals. So in terms of finding distributor, it's true the year was very complicated because distributors are totally in panic. We don't know when the cinema will open. All of them have a lot of film to release, so they were not really in position to acquire new films. What's happened for these auteur films, it was a real coup de coeur. Each director had something specific with this film. I said, okay, I take a risk to try to release Natural Light in my territory or Moon 66 Question. It happened also for Suzanne Lindon with Spring Blossom that was selected in Cannes. So the relation with the distributor was complicated because the future is uncertain. Now what we miss and what our director miss, it's kind of the ritual of presenting your film. So they work years on their first feature film, and now they're waiting for the first meeting between their film and the audience. So film and festival, it's something important for all of us. This ritual, this premiere, this big screen, how people, the word of mouth, the applause, the reaction, it's something that remains very human. We succeed to create some links using strategy, marketing, etc. But we are still missing this very important reaction of the audience that makes these films exist. And so nowadays, we are waiting. We are hoping that Carlo will be able to welcome this director in June. In Suzanne Lindon, after Cannes, she was able only to attend one festival in Greece. And unfortunately, she will not be really available and allowed to attend the promotion of her film for the future releases of her film. So they are a little bit frustrated, but in the same time, some of these films find a way to exist online. And for example, Spring Blossom will start a national release in the US on cinema online, but as soon as the cinema will open, the distributor will spread the film in the territory. It will be the same thing with the same film, Spring Blossom, in the UK with Curzon, that will release the film online, and after he will put it on their cinemas.
So, Hedy and Jason, can I ask you then, from what you're saying, you are recounting positive experiences you've had. If we look back to the way things were, you as sales agents going forward, what would you incorporate from the changes we've just had? what would you like to stay? Because I know, for example, it's an expensive operation to bring films to festivals, and so.
Basically, there is two big things. I'm a positive optimist, but I cannot avoid the reality of the deals. So basically, these films find distributor, but to be honest, the deals are lower. We have to face this reality for now because art house cinema and the distribution, the theatrical distribution, remain a little bit fragile these years. So I hope that distributor will be more confident in the future and take a higher risk on some production. What we will keep, I would say, the way that we position our digital marketing. It's a little bit different. We try to target a little bit more. And important to say also, we used the online market screening that the markets and festival organize, but when it was possible, we organized real screening in real cinema in some cities. It was happened with Berlinale that allow us to organize with EFM a screening in Australia, a screening in Japan, and these screenings have been very successful. The screening of Natural Light in Tokyo was very successful. A lot of distributors attended. And as Luxbox, we add some screenings, renting some cinema, one in Rome to allow some journalists to watch the film. We organize screenings in Amsterdam, Zurich, Geneva, Brussels, etc., etc. So we try to mix both the online market screening and real screening on cinema. And distributor was really open for this double proposition, and it was for us as art house sales agent easier because we invite them one day at 1 hour, so we have no competition. When we are in the big festival, when you organize your market screening, you can have the Scorsese premiere in the same time, so you can miss some guests.
How about you, Jason?
I think, we are thinking about what the future looks like with a blended marketplace and what works on a virtual setting. And, the biggest issue that sort of faces us, we do really care about audience reaction, and we want buyers to see it with an audience to sort of visualize that component of a release. That's very hard to replicate in the space of virtual. We can point to certain things, we could point to Twitter reactions or some other things, but it doesn't have the sort of real time feeling that translates necessarily. We can point to other things like press and awards and prestige of selection, which are good and really important for a lot of movies. But I think the audience component to a movie is something that is really critical for us, and it's very hard to demonstrate to buyers and other people what the audience looks like. But there are a lot of positive signals that we have from the marketplace. People returning to film festival, people returning to theaters, is something that is optimistic. And I think the smarter distributors were able to pivot and be creative about how and when they release films, whether they go simultaneously virtual and then go to theaters at the right time to target a very different audience for their movie. I think unsurprisingly, one of the distributors we have 3 films with out of the spring is Neon, and I think they're a great, innovative company that is willing to roll the dice and be creative on a case-by-case basis for a movie. They still want to release films. They're still primarily a theatrical distributor, but they are innovative and creative, and I think that is a good sign for the marketplace that these traditional windows won't necessarily apply to all movies. They'll still apply to some movies for sure, and the rollouts that are standard with festivals and theatrical, then broadcast or streaming are going to be right for some movies, but they're not necessarily right for all movies. So I think the collapse of some of these windows presents an opportunity for certain movies.
Tabitha, going back to you again, does that collapse or, partial collapse and threatened collapse, inch by inch collapse, does that affect festivals? I mean, how does that, how does the new flexible way of showing films, which you in a way helped usher in, how do you think that will affect festivals going forward?
I don't think I can comment intelligently on a question with that scope, but it was what we need to be very mindful of is what the role of the festival is and isn't. And so, for us, a festival of discovery, the primacy of those voices that may not otherwise be heard, and the ideas within films that may not otherwise be heard. It's really important that we show those films and that we find audiences in order that we can hopefully, build buzz, generate press, give them that launch that can then result in a powerful distribution mechanism and get them to audiences, because that's what we wish for. And so in order to do that successfully, we absolutely want to partner with the other bits of the ecosystem that help us do that. So it's really key that, as Jason was saying before, that we're having these conversations as we're conceptualizing what our festivals are, that we're working in partnership with these very delicate structures. However, we also know that the before times way of doing it wasn't altogether equitable or useful to all kinds of films that we may wish to support with our mission. And so what is the opportunity now, with this kind of flexibility, let's say, rather than collapse, but flexibility in what's possible, and the discoveries that we're making as festivals around younger audiences that we can attract to this kind of work, who may not be going to theatres, they might be living in cinema deserts, but they can somehow encounter this work with us at the festival. All that put against our responsibility not to overexpose films at this point in their life, and to preserve the energy behind them that gets people talking and gets the appetite up for seeing them and finding them later, which is why we were very clear that we wanted to understand how to preserve that festival energy, why we needed to put lots of resources into live Q&As with filmmakers after the timed premiere of a film online, where there's a waiting room experience where people are talking to each other before the film starts, a live Q&A afterwards, and the possibility of a social space. All that is designed because it's lovely to have, but also because we felt it was necessary in order to preserve that flow and that energy that would result in getting work to audiences. So hopefully I've successfully dodged your big grown-up questioning about windowing.
Maybe I'll just move along to the next person. Carlo? It must be slightly intoxicating, though, at the idea of democratization for film festivals. You have the potential of a wider reach, even if it's geo-blocked. You're no longer in a city. You can go further. You can find these young audiences that you were talking about. Carlo, I know that Berlin has a massive fan base, huge amounts of tickets sold, and it's a very democratic program. Actually, it's very, very big. So you didn't go online at all this year with your competition program. Was that ever a question that you had in your mind, that you tried to hit up, to try to go for a German a geo-blocking to Germany and see if you could show the films that way, because some of them are smaller in your smaller sections?
Well, to be honest, not. This for the 2021 edition, we didn't have any plan to go online for the public. Again, part of the answer is because Berlinale is very much part of a chain. So we work with theaters in order to make our festival happening, but also because our main supporter is also the supporter of theaters, and also because probably it's also inherent to the soul of Berlinale. I am aware that going online offer a chance for people that cannot travel to Berlin, simply because not even a matter of money, but simply being able to be in Berlin and access the screenings. At the same time, our audience is composed by people that doesn't have the same kind of access to internet that maybe other people have. So the question of expanding the audience is in my mind, but I'm not sure that going fully online will be the answer, at least for us. But as Tabitha said, I also believe that we have to think about opportunity rather than damaging, and I can see that this new scenario is offering opportunity. What we got from the last edition is that it is possible to support films through an online event. It is possible to pave the way for them to find a way to be distributed, to be seen. What I still don't have an answer for is the social event. This is something that we try. So I experience online party. I experience online discussion, and they are an answer for sure. But to me, the gap between the social event that a festival offer and the offer that this online social gathering, it's huge. It's huge. I'm here in Nyon because I really miss. Like it's more physical. I miss the feeling to be with other people face to face. I don't know if this is the old school, but it's something, as Hedy said, is very human. So I don't know what we can do on that level.
I noticed with Sundance and with the Berlinale this year, which came very close together, there was a really positive response to the curation, to the artistic direction and the films that you chose and showed. And I wondered whether the change in the climate with Corona, the lack of travel, the sort of closure of cinemas, gave you an opportunity in a way, both of you, Tabitha and Carlo, to be a little bit more experimental or pure, or in your approach, because it was quite notable.
Carlo,
yeah, maybe I can start. Yeah, I to be more radical than than my predecessor, and but at the same time, and of course, this year the program was heavily affected by the pandemic. On the one hand, I enjoy a bigger freedom. Because when you don't have, when you know that you don't have a red carpet, you also can be more daring. At the same time, I now feel that I miss that part, because the film with big stars gives something different. And also, my biggest pleasure that was in Locarno, and is even more in Berlin, is to merge audiences. And this program, this year, the program was more compact, and we really enhanced that element because we knew that the program was, in the first place, devoted to professionals, so to people that are used to watch film. In a normal edition, probably would have worked differently, the program. And I think, at least for me, I have a duty, I feel that I have a duty to mix audience. And in order to mix audience, I need to bring audience with some film that can have an appeal for them. And this year I couldn't do that. At least I couldn't do the way I wanted. So yes, I was happy with the result. I was happy in a curatorial level. I think we achieved something important, because I don't know, Tabitha will say her point of view, but it was not easy to put together the program, especially for us, because we started with one idea of festival and we'd end up with another one. So we really have to reshape. And at the end, I was very happy. At the same time, I think that was good for 1 year. and the press react was very good, because I think it was this year, it was a big challenge to make the festival happen, and I'm very grateful to all the team at the Berlinale. At the same time, if I have to project myself to 2022, I would love to have a more diverse program in terms of film that can appeal to different kind of audiences.
It's so interesting hearing you talk, Carlo, because there is so much that we absolutely share in that. I would say, and again, it was my first festival, but as every single element of the festival had to be rethought, and we needed to understand what we wish to hold tight to and what we wish to let go. And our mission was really helpful in that. It was actually the programming that it was able to retain its kind of purity is not quite the word I want, but that process was the same process as every year. What is the work being made? Who are the artists that we're most interested in, giving a spotlight to and a showcase to, and then how do these things go together to form not just a collection of films that we like, but how does it form a festival program, and how does it somehow speak to the moment while also having a more timeless quality of not immediately going out of date. So we did decide on a tighter program because we didn't know what we were going to see because of the pandemic. But then within that, it was, as Carlo was saying, it's kind of liberating to see the work that perhaps in another year, with a different selection of films coming our way, would be equally as powerful, but may not have made it into the program. I mean, we were lucky. I'm glad that we had so many films that were sales titles. We've seen the trend of films coming into the festival over the last 5 years, an increasing number already pre-sold. And I wonder if that trend is going to continue. But this year we were able to major on films that were sales titles and first-time directors, which was exciting, while also benefiting from being in the Oscar window and being able to show things like Judas and the Black Messiah, which is represented in the campaigns pretty heavily in the nominations, as well as things like, Minari is now in the Oscars. It was from the festival last year. So we were in a kind of a sweet spot. It was a unique year. We were able to really, by having a tighter program, delineate what we're there for, which is discovery and these emerging voices. They don't have to be young voices, but also have we're not a red carpet festival, but yes, we often have more celebrities and higher profile people. I actually liked it this year. As we go into 22, as Carlo says, it's a completely different year, and so we need to understand again how we meet that moment, the moment of convergence, hybridity, how people are going to be feeling. And in the US, we just had this incredible, and around the world, but incredible series of events that were not expected. The pandemic, the economic downturn, the racial uprising, the assault on democracy. How can you program a festival that feels like it meets that moment? So it was a beast to put on. I think anyone putting on a festival, including Vision this year, it's so difficult. But if we can just hold tight to our mission and our purpose and keep talking to each other, that's how we're going to get through it, I think.
Well, what you said, you both did a terrific job. I mean, and my admiration to you for holding cool in the face of what was going on and to producing such amazing festivals. But Carlo, Tabitha referred to business being strong on some of the titles that were at Sundance, and also too the business on the Berlinale titles was also good too, or at least from my perspective, I thought it was good. Did you think that separating the festival and the market was a problem for the titles in the festival this year? Or, well, it's not the festival, but the buzz that came from journalists and professionals watching the films online, did that help the market? Let me rephrase it.
Well, for sure it helps. Also, we had this year a very reduced program, and I think this is also something we have really to think it over, because that was possible because we didn't have the festival with the public. You know, in Berlin, we don't have huge venues, and in the future, I don't know if it will be possible to have huge venues. So we have to include many films to offer something to the millions of potential millions of people living in Berlin. This year, we didn't have that requirement, and we reduced the program. Like we selected 100 titles, while usually we have 300s, and I think this was a big advantage for the film selected. It was good because the press could really focus on the film. It was good because the sales could really work without this big mass of title. And then first of all, the festival, for me, it's very hard to say, because the festival happened along with the market. The second part of the festival, the public, still has to happen. But the goal, our goals, was really to support the films in their trajectory. And we got that the buzz is possible, and probably in the future we will also work more, because Sundance gave us a lot of good ideas in that respect. Doing Q&A, doing other activities that we didn't plan, because at the beginning we didn't have that idea, and it was already a big stress to put in place the platform and everything to make this film available all over the world for the press and the professional. Was a big effort. But yes, so it is. I think the biggest outcome for me is that if you have less film, especially in this setting and the setting we are living, it's a great advantage. It's more difficult to compose the program, but it's a great advantage.
Jason and Hetty, do you agree with the idea that less is more?
Basically, I find it people were more focused on films. So cinema needs space and time. So if each day you have too many new films, you don't allow a film to grow and to have his own space. Sometimes you need time to react to the emotion and to share it. So for me, it was a big advantage. Of course, we miss the collective experience, because it's what cinema is made for, and art in general. We need to live some experience with others, because the collective allows us to be more curious and to discover new things, because by our own we will perhaps instinctively go to see what we like or what we think we would like. And I hope that the 2022 edition of Berlin and Sundance will include this human interaction that is really fundamental, because back to the distributor that I mentioned, I'm still talking with distributor that discover my Berlinale or Sundance title, and the question is that I see and I feel that they're missing interaction with other distributors, so they can contact some of their friends, but when you are in a festival and you share with others the same emotion, you see it, you feel it, and you meet fun, and fun give you a reaction or advice, etc. So yes, cinema need time and need space. So less title will allow us to have more, a bigger area to explore and to make grow.
Jason, what's your feeling on that?
I think the other thing is that, what we're seeing is a bit of like industry fatigue and buyer fatigue on these these festivals are shorter for a reason. And I think in part because, and they have to have a condensed lineup, because it's just physically impossible to schedule 300 movies in 5 or 6 days. And at a film festival, not every buyer goes for the full duration, but a lot do, and a lot of industry do. And there's a little more breathing room that can happen in person, that virtually you just have a much shorter window of people's attention spans, and films that, can benefit from that. So we thought a lot about that as well, in terms of our lineup, our scheduling of our films were very particular with when our films screen and how they screen and where they screen. But we also translated that virtually. So a lot of films benefited from a shorter, smaller program. A lot of films benefited from not having to compete for press against films that had distribution, because I think increasingly what we saw at a lot of these festivals is that the films that were going to be released in, March or in the spring, they had trailers, they had posters, they were ready to go, and they're very much market facing. So they would get the lion's share of press, and that our focus would be largely in and around trade press. For premiere festivals like Berlin and Sundance. And we saw a little more robust festival presence, in large part because industry were able to cover films that were acquisition titles that they may not have focused on or prioritized in a different version of the festival. So, going into 2022, I don't know. I mean, I think the conversations are just happening in terms of how big the lineups are, what's going to be composed of them. What kind of movie are they going to be? Acquisitions titles? Are they going to be distribution titles? So that's going to change our understanding of the festival and sort of where these films fit into it.
Is there any, Jason, because Cannes is now going into a position where there's a taster market before the festival. And AFM, of course, has never had a festival really attached to it in the same way as, say, Cannes or Berlin. Is there any way you see the two separating, or playing out consecutively? You're talking about people being able to see so much more when they're not. When they're not sort of doubled up on different things that they, physically they can see more online.
I think when you look at markets like the Cannes market, there's actually very little crossover in terms of the main slate selection and the market itself. But I do think there is this halo effect that happens in and around the market that lifts a lot of projects and a lot of sales agents' sort of lineups, even if the vast majority of their films are not screening at the festival proper. So I do think detangling the market experience and the festival experience will benefit certain movies, but won't benefit others necessarily. And I don't know if agents are going to bring as robust a lineup or weight for a market if they know that that experience is going to be different. What we're seeing on our side, at least on the agency side in the US, is that, they've long sort of abandoned a market-oriented model specifically as it relates to narrative films. We're also seeing it on documentaries as well, where this is basically a 360 marketplace. People are not holding movies to premiere at film festivals. We're holding specific movies to premiere at festivals that we feel are very, festival driven. But the large amount of sales that were happening, and this is why Sundance and other festivals were playing films with pre-bought distribution, is that the marketplace has always kind of been 360 for certain kinds of movies. Like it just never stops. But for other films, we really rely on that experience, the in-person experience, the festival experience. And I still believe that festivals are tied to a place and the experience, and that's how we think about festivals in terms of sales. Where is it screening? The timing in which it screens. Is it in the beginning of the festival, the end of the festival? Is it in the competition, which also determines sometimes what venues it plays in? Those things still they're really part of our process, and you can't really make films feel special in that way virtually. You can put restrictions on how people see films, in terms of windowing or special links, but it's not quite the same as going to a great venue in a great time slot. That those, we can pull different levers when we're thinking about how to present a movie, but the decisions that are made are vastly different than an in-person experience.
Thank you. Hetty, going forward, you work very closely with filmmakers, and obviously it's been a very disrupted time. How do you feel in terms of films coming onto the marketplace as we go forward now? We move past Cannes into the end of the year and then on to Sundance and Berlinale next year. What's your take on what's happening?
Regarding the film that we are following, some of them has to stop all the post-production, all the shooting have been delayed. Luckily, we have some film, for example, in Mexico, director was able to start shooting again quite early this year in September. So I have different projects at different stage. So for 2022, to be honest, I have already filmed that will be ready. It just that this year, for sure, Luxbox we handle usually around 8 new films per year, and this year we only launched 5 films. So for the upcoming films, basically, I have, I think around like 6, 7 films that will be ready between the second half of the year and the beginning of the next year. It was just rescheduling the things, and we spent all of us all the year rescheduling. So there is film that I thought that will be ready for Berlin this year, but they has to stop the shooting, and they are going to shoot again in a couple of months, etc., etc. So it was just a question of scheduling. It was, I think, more stressful for the producer, because they have to find, new solution. They lost money. Some project they lost money because they have to stop the shooting, etc. So regarding the kind of film I'm representing, it just we reschedule the period when we want to launch it, etc. But regarding my company, we barely finding a balance, because really, again, we want to launch film with time and take the right decision regarding the right festival, the right DNA of each festival, etc. So we just take our time, but luckily the majority of our producers succeed to or start again the post-production or to reschedule quite soon.
How about you, Jason, in the independent, sector in the United States? What's your sense of what it's going to be like?
Narratives are still going to be affected. I think people are starting to really shoot this summer. So that's optimistic that they can make some films will just not be ready for Sundance. I think that's the reality if they're shooting midsummer. Some might be able to be ready, but it will be a real sprint for those movies to be prepared. But it's not unusual. We've had films that have shot in June, July, and somehow made it to Sundance. So we are thinking about that in terms of like the windowing and things that can be ready for next year and what that looks like. Some films won't be ready. That's just the reality of it. But we haven't seen a significant drop off in the amount of films we've taken on. We take on for North American sales probably around 50 films a year, and including series and other things. And I don't see us reducing the amount of films that we work on. But in terms of whether or not they're presented in film festivals, that's shifting quite a bit on our end.
You mean it presented in any film festival, or sorry, could you elaborate?
For our purposes of selling it, once the distributor has the film, they can, do it. They can present it themselves at a film festival. They may go straight to market or straight to streaming services. It's sort of in their court. We have some influence over it, but not really. So it's really about the timing and when it's right for movies to enter the marketplace. And what we're seeing is for certain movies, we're pushing that up a little earlier and going out earlier with distribution. So we have a lot of films that are coming out this year that we've not presented at film festivals that are going to go straight to distribution.
Okay. Carlo, what's yours? I mean, you're very in contact with. Oh, sorry, Hetty.
No, I just want to underline the fact that we have to consider that there is territories of production like France where there is like institutional funds that remain very active. Basically, I'm afraid of these territories where cinema production is really based on private funding. And in this case, I think we will see a gap here because in Europe and in some territories, the culture and cinema is a real statesman. So these kind of, in France, the shooting start again, in the sense they have been very active to support all the production. But I'm thinking about, for example, Brazil. Unfortunately, cinema is not a priority of the current present government. And I know that the private funding in Brazil have been, it's a big problem for the independent distributor, because they used to find private money to invest in their film, and this year have been a disaster for them. So I think the map of the production, we will see the territory where cinema can still resist because it's a political desire, and the other where we will see perhaps less film from Brazil, for example, next year.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was going to ask Carlo, really, was what was your sense, Carlo, and also Tabitha, because you'll be screening already for Sundance, and Carlo, you're so connected with sort of European independent and international independent cinema, in how it's looking in terms of the landscape that you're dealing with for selections.
You mean for the next year, right? For the 2022,
yes,
for the next edition, yeah.
Yes.
Well, Hedy has already answered a little bit the question. Me personally, I don't have any problem. Every year, I have big faith in cinema. I think what filmmakers have proved last year is that is, even in very harsh conditions, they managed to create their own stories. They managed to shoot films during the pandemic. They managed to readapt themselves. Céline Sciamma film was a film that was planned to be shot during the pandemic. The Golden Bear winner is a film that was planned to be shot before the pandemic, and it was shot during the pandemic. And because of that, the film gained something. At least that's my opinion. So I don't have big concern about that, to be honest. Of course, as Hedy said, probably some territories will suffer more than others. And this year we already saw that. We saw that, for instance, China, because of the lockdown, the censorship got a lot of delay. So there are like there is a huge number of films waiting to pass the censor. So maybe 2022 we will have all these films ready. And the Southeast Asia is something that we should look into that more carefully. What I felt maybe, Finn, is that because travel were not possible, of course, each festival has a very big and spread and net, but not being able to travel, it's a big limitation, because when you go on place, you have a kind of different discussion that you can have online. And this is something that I hope to a certain extent it will be possible in the next future, because it's not only a matter of which film you select, but it's the kind of conversation you can have. It's also, when we travel, we also we engage a conversation that maybe help other films to be made, not the ones that we are selected. And this kind of, I felt to put that in a very simplistic way, that the world again become bigger and distance become bigger. And that's maybe for some aspect is not that bad, but for other it is a downside.
Yes, and I'm just wondering, we've just had a question in from somebody from Peru who's asking what you feel about films from the South, and I'm just wondering in what Hedy had said, whether you're concerned in a way about talk about the world getting bigger, but also economies that are struggling and people who are working outside the framework of national institutions for support, that it will end up damaging what we see, or not damaging, but restricting what we are able to see on screen and the experiences that we view as consumers of cinema.
Me, Finn, or for Tabitha?
Oh yes, that was to you. Sorry, that was a follow-up to you.
No problem. Yeah, well, again, I think that the biggest advantage of the digitalization is that you can make your own film and be very strong with little money. You can, and then that's the role of festivals, to be open and curious enough to give room to these films. again, Berlinale, Berlin Film Festival, Sundance, Cannes, Venice are known all over the world. And what is always amazed me is that in the spontaneous submission, each year you find some hidden gems. And these films, in the majority of cases, are produced with little money, and this film don't need any big support. And then, of course, if we talk about industry, you need a lot of work once the film is selected or in order to be post-produced. But the biggest advantage is that in a festival like Berlin, you can put together films that are produced in a very different way. And even if you cannot compare them, you can give the right platform for them to exist. So again, I'm not that worried. I hope I won't be disappointed by the creators, but I believe not.
I mean, Tabitha, Carlo was talking about traveling, and of course all your selectors have traveled all over the world, and Sundance is very well known for being a huge supporter of independent cinema globally. It's not just American cinema. So how's that affecting you, the restrictions in travel and of next year's program? Sorry,
right.
In terms of next year's program.
Yes, and I think these things. We have progressed in our thinking, I think, as a field and as individuals, realizing what the impact was of certain habits that we were in before. And now it's not just the means of producing the films that have been changed, now the means of interaction and the possibility of having a conversation like this without us all needing to fly to Neon, although it would be wonderful to be there in person for some reasons, we don't all have to jump on planes to do that. It had become a kind of a default. And so I think that rupture, that enforced pause, which invited us to think about what we were doing and what effect that was having on the planet, on resources, and traveling is tiring as well. I think that was useful. What we learned was that we could do a really amazing scouting trip to, say, the continent of Africa and meet lots of different people who we wouldn't have otherwise have been able to meet in the same way, all from our respective locations. And that has a democratizing effect on the fact that everyone's little Zoom box is the same size. There is an intimacy and a generosity that comes with this technology. And so I think as we go forward, and also just remembering, we are really lucky. It hasn't felt like it for a while, but we're really lucky to be in these countries where vaccinations are now becoming increasingly accessible. At the expense, it must be said, of other countries where that has not been made possible or a priority. And so for us to jump on planes and go around the country again when we're still in a pandemic globally doesn't seem desirable or particularly ethical. So I'm looking forward to the combination of using what we've learned, this new technology, to be talking, to be tracking, to be screening films, and then in those moments which will become even more special where we are able to gather safely, that will be the thing to do. But again, I just urge us not to go back to all the old habits we had before this kind of revelation about the impact of what we were doing was.
Can I ask you all just a financial question, the financials of it all? You know, I mean, obviously, if you're a smaller online festival than your normal big size, you might suffer in terms of sponsorship, or you might ticket sales, you know, may be up, but they don't quite match, you know, because people are watching the films in groups, maybe, or something like that. So perhaps starting with you again, Tabitha, to sort of ask you, like, financially, how it affects you as a festival and your scope for, you know, the international achievements you want to realize. Does it curtail you a bit, that element of things?
Last year was interesting because it was such a crisis. We're a non-profit institute and a non-profit festival, and we don't have you know, that European approach to culture, which I greatly miss, which is it is a public good and therefore it must be supported by governments. We don't have that. But sponsors and supporters and donors came on board because it was such an existentially challenging year for us. And so again, it's what makes 22 more difficult with some of those were one-off support. So we'll see. We in fact got more sponsors than we'd had previously. So that was good. And the ticket sales were robust for us, and we were able to then fund, investing large amounts of money in a bespoke platform, which we now have. So who knows what 22 will bring, because of the companies, the corporations, the foundations that support us also have suffered. So we're very much thinking about what is an appropriate size and scale for this, but also what is at stake. And I'm, as we all are, thinking a lot about filmmakers and their sustainability and what it means for them. Be interested in hearing from, Jason and Eddie, because the online festivals, whether they're big online festivals or whether they're the regional festivals, mean that the work is being exposed in a different way, and that has an impact on screening fees, on the viability of regional festivals, and what it means for theatres. So all this reconfiguring for 22, which will in itself be a unique year, has to take on board that kind of hope of doing no harm. The stuff we had to do last year, there's stuff that we want to do this year. How do we do it together without damaging the actual sustainability of the people whose work we want to get out there?
Jason, Eddie, can I ask you? I was literally just about to ask you about screening fees and exactly what Tabitha has just said.
Regarding as we are in contact with a lot of international, local, and smaller festivals, unfortunately, we saw a lot of festivals that they lost a lot of money, so they were not really able, and they all asked us to renegotiate the screening fee, and it's the reality of a lot of more local and small festivals. So yes, it's a reality, because for some festival, the tickets are an important incomes, and a lot of them have been impacted by partners that left the festival because the visibility was lower or more important, or the groups have been affected by the crisis. So for small local festival, this year have been very difficult, and I'm a little bit concerned. I don't know, some of them think that they will never be able, if they don't have a support of the city or the region or the state, to come back next year. So I think, we will witness some sad news the upcoming month for small festivals.
Jason, what about you? What's your sense?
Our concern is less about festival screening fees. It's just not a big part of our business, but we are, really invested in management and representation of talent. And these festivals, not only are they a great launching pad for filmmakers for their current film, but it's also about the future of their careers. That's a really hard thing to replicate as well. The on-the-ground buzz can really translate into getting people on board early onto a project that is their next film or their following film after that. So, getting those conversations going, having the breathing room of a longer festival, having people on the ground, different types of people, including creative executives, including rich people, which, certain festivals draw. Those things are really important for the universe of film, especially in American cinema, where we don't have any national support system. We are reliant on private equity or grants from institutions or individuals. So especially in that really early stage of pre-production or, the concept or writing a screenplay, there's not a lot of support systems for those films. And that's a great window, especially as it relates to Sundance, because they have such a track record with the Institute supporting movies in such an early phase. That's a really big part of what we do for our filmmakers that we work with. And that's a really hard thing to replicate. We're not having in-person meetings. So, you know, a lot of filmmakers have focused their energy on other things, writing, optioning things. You know, filmmakers there's no shortage of people being busy, but a lot of the things that we're used to doing on the ground at a film festival for a director that has a film there, we can't necessarily do in person. So that's a bit tricky. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw, especially with the US investors, you know, a lot of them support independent film because it's an extension of their advocacy work, and it's an extension of a lot of other things that they want to support. And their support was being pulled in a lot of different directions because of social justice issues in America, because of the election. But so the summer was a little fraught, but what we saw, the fall sort of came back around, and we had, you know, for example, we had 4 films in Catalyst, which is a Sundance program that's meant to support films in various stages and connect investors with projects. We've never had that many films in a program like that because it's a small program of films, but it's in part because of our focus on management and filmmakers' careers. And also, you know, we've had much more time and energy to develop these projects in the pandemic because films aren't shooting. So those elements are still really important, and having an in-person festival is a really great way to tie all these things together so that there is this coming together moment, and having sort of these sort of unusual relationships come together, having very wealthy people see a movie and be moved by it and want to support a campaign. You know, those are things that can only really happen in person. We're not really seeing that happen virtually, and also because of the state of the world that we were in the summer and the fall. It's understandable that people who have, you know, a different agenda besides purely making money, that they want to help change the world for the better, they have a lot of really pressing issues to attend to as well. So those are the focuses on our side in terms of career sustainability, filmmaker support, that are things that we're thinking about in terms of their careers, less the screening fee part of things, because our hope is that we sell it at the festival and don't have to deal with it, don't have to deal with future festival screening fees. Fingers crossed.
Fair point. Carlo, how about the Berlinale? I mean, we're talking about, you know, public support. Is the Berlinale sort of secure and the ticket sales not an issue? Are you big enough that it doesn't make a difference? Because you had talked about maybe earlier about.
Are you kidding? You usually sell 300,000 tickets. So no, it's we could make the 2021 edition only because we got a super extra support from the government. And our June event, by the way, for our June event, we decided not to do any ticketing on our side, but support the theaters. Because again, we are in that respect, we are privileged because we are basically heavily supported by the government. But we know already now that financially our model has to be rethink. We have to rethink the financial model, because I have problem in seeing, at least for the next year, that we will be able to have 100% capacity in all our theaters, which already put our financial model at stake. So we have to think about a different model. And again, the situation with festivals such as Berlin in Europe is that we are protected by the government, but at the same time, the government or our institutional supporter ask us a plan. They don't just give us money just because Berlinale exists and is too big to fail. So we are in constant discussion with them. It's more Mariette Rissenbeck, my partner, who is on that. Yeah, so we have to rethink the financial model for sure for 2022 and maybe for the future, because again, we won't be able to have 500,000 attendance as usual we do have. That's for sure.
Is that the same for you, Tabitha? You're having to do the same sort of quick thinking based on that proposition that you won't have full theatres anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of what we were talking about before in scenario planning. We can't assume we can do a model where it's 100% capacity, but we also have to do a model where it isn't, because that's the state of the world now. And it does matter, you know, putting on an in-person festival, which is what we very much hope to be able to do in whatever way we can, is really expensive. And the way we fund that is by selling tickets. So if we can sell fewer tickets because the capacity is lower, then that's a problem. So yes, it's we're going through exactly the same thing as Carlo and Marietta. So
even in an ideal, well, let me ask you this then. You know, and I start with you, Tabitha. You know, you're obviously working hard towards, you know, preserving the festival and going forward, taking it forward. What's the thing that you would most want to see happen when it comes to next January? Being with your festival.
Right. I mean, I would wish that we are back in Park City to the extent that we are able, and that building on what we did last year, the audience is a significant number, according to our post-festival surveys. A significant number of people came to Sundance for the first time last year. And so I don't want to lose those people or, you know, kind of close the door on them because we don't need them anymore because we're back in Park City. And so how do we retain that development of audiences for independent cinema, however one wishes to describe it, the diversity of voices, bring those people to the field that we work in and to our festival, while giving, wherever they are, giving everyone the feeling of a festival, which is a gathering, it is a communion, it is a social space, it is a celebration. How can we do that and make the money work? And make the ecosystem work. So that's where my head is in that very interesting philosophical, ideological, financial, practical space. So what I really want to do is sit down with Carlo and Marietta and drink copious amounts of wine and talk about what we're doing.
Let's do that.
Carlo, can I ask you the same question, Carlo? Then, you know, sort of going towards next February, you know, ideal world. What's happening? Is Berlin back to where it was? Are you taking some things forward? What are you changing? You know.
Yeah. Well, right now we are still thinking about locking our 2021 edition, because still this is very much in our mind. But yes, so we are already thinking about a different plan for 2022, different from the previous edition. So we know that the market worked fine with a hybrid version, and this is something we already discussed with Dennis, the head of the market. So there will be for sure more hybridation. For me also, it's very meaningful to see how the festival in the summer, namely Cannes and Venice, will pull out their event, because as Tabitha said, we are also part of the ecosystem, the festival, and what one festival put in place is also great advantage, or can be very meaningful. So we have some ideas in mind. We have to discuss these ideas with our partners, and I think, yeah, it's too early to say. But what I would like to add is also, because this is also something we acknowledge this year, is that you can also be more rationalizing your expenses. As Tabitha said, travel, it's very important. At the same time, it's very costly, not only for the money, but also for the ecosystem. So I think there is also room to work on that part of the festival. And maybe before there was, as Tabitha said, there was an habit, and then maybe it's time to change that habit without losing the pleasure of meeting face to face.
How about you, Jason? I mean, you're obviously working on various scenarios. You've got films coming in. What's your wish or desire for next year when we all have this conversation again?
I hope we don't have to have this conversation again. I hope things are, or we'll be looking back maybe, less prognosticating, because it's like, we've given up really on figuring out when things are going to go back to normal. I don't think there is going to be a normal for the foreseeable future. And it's really, I think a lot of the conversations, and we've already had our first one with Tabitha and the team at Sundance, is about like what worked, what didn't work, how do we incentivize people to go back to a place and also have components to a festival that feel like they've given accessibility to people to discover things, because that is really the goal of Sundance, is to discover new films, new talent. And there's no right answer to any of this. We're all sort of traversing something that's completely unknown, especially as it relates to next year. But there are new models, there is new technology that can be taken advantage of and done in the right way. But I think it's about communication, because, what we saw with Sundance was we really spent a lot of time and energy enforcing, and it wasn't just us, it was all the sales agents, were really enforcing the fact that we were going to screen our films on this platform. And if you want to watch it for the first time, you have to be there with everyone else. And it's going to be harder to do that in person if they know that there's a simultaneous virtual screening and they don't have to pay the money or go places and have to, figure out what to do with their children for a week and a half. There's a lot of incentives to not travel for festivals, but at the same time, it's how we see these film festivals. We see them in a place, in a space. We don't see them as these sort of virtual things that happen everywhere all at once, because that starts to look like distribution. So we are sort of balancing all of these things. There's a lot of great things, especially as it relates to travel. I think for a lot of us, it's on whenever we travel to markets, especially not the big markets, it's usually just one of us. And it's nice to be able to spread out and delegate people to cover films and markets in a way that, especially if it's a junior staff member, like, there's less of this sort of approvals or hierarchy on who gets to do what. So I do think at least we are being a little more robust in our attempts to cover different marketplaces and pitch forums. And it allows us to be a little more flexible with who does what. And that's an exciting thing, I think, for a lot of different people to interact, that it isn't this sort of tight-knit community of the same people going to the same markets over and over and over, where we see the same people. That sort of gatekeeping, I think, is diminishing, and I think it's good for new films that there are new voices in terms of the people making decisions. That guard is shifting, and the responsibilities of people are shifting. So we're seeing a lot of that, and I think that is a positive sign.
That's a great point. Hedy, what's your feelings on this?
My feeling is really, I hope that next Berlinale EFM, it will be the moment where we will meet all our distributors from around the world, because we know, for instance, that the upcoming 6 months, the majority of, for example, Japanese distributor will not travel in Europe. A lot of Latin American distributor will not travel, etc. So for me, the first market where we will be able to meet the international community of film industry, for me, it will be a good sign because it's mean that all these people have access to vaccine. And so that I totally agree with Jason. We have to rethink our travel strategy. We don't have to attend all the markets. We don't have all of us to be present in all the markets. I totally agree that we have to split to send, we are already doing it and planning to send our team by themselves in some festival and give them the responsibility to handle the crew, the director, etc., to be more, to make economy and to be more responsible. But my wish and desire, it's to be in a festival where to be able to meet my different distributor and to have in person the echoes of this industry worldwide. And I would be a little bit sad to attend a market where I can only meet the European and have only Zoom with the Asian distributor. The dialogue is more vivid and real when we meet each other. But I totally agree. I think we have to target the quality than the quantity, and reconnect and a little bit go out from these Zoom boxes.
Yeah, well, that's a good note because we're actually coming to the end of our time. So, I just thought I would ask you all just if you had anything to add that I haven't covered or that we haven't covered or we haven't covered enough. That's a burning thought on your minds that you feel hasn't been discussed. Nothing?
I just wanted to reinforce, this has been a wonderful conversation, and you certainly gave us the time and space, to Eddie's point, to think through these things. It's just also for us not to forget what's happening in the world and this age of accountability. Jason referenced it then. Who's making the decisions? What are the voices and ideas that need circulation in these times to deal with these times, to both make sense of them and perhaps imagine a better future with beauty, truth, and justice, and film, art, festivals, getting that work to audiences is so important. And that responsibility and the responsibility of ensuring that filmmakers can operate in a sustainable way and have their work seen and be recompensed. There's still a lot of work to do, and there's still a lot of work to do on questions of authorship around who gets to make films. It's an incredible moment. And we have the chance to push it forward, and that's why it's so wonderful for me to be part of this world with the people on this call thinking about these things. That was a bit of a speech. Sorry about that.
I really thought it was a great speech. Thank you. That's much more inspiring than getting out of the boxes. Yes, we do have an opportunity. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Tabitha, Carlo, Jason, Eddie. Really appreciate all your thoughts and honesty and frankness. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Finn, for your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.